What if the most effective attack in this war was the one you couldn't see? If you look at Russia today, it doesn't look like a country collapsing. The economy didn't implode overnight. In fact, for a moment, it even looked stable. Growth bounced back. Oil was still flowing. The war machine kept running. So naturally, the question became, are sanctions even working? But that question misses the point. Instead of aiming for immediate collapse, the US aimed for something much colder, much slower, and much harder to reverse. The US was making sure that over time, Russia runs out of options. Let's start with the least visible but arguably most important battlefield: technology. Back in mid-2024, the US went after the entire supply pipeline. Not just what Russia buys, but how it buys it. Shell companies in Hong Kong? Blacklisted. Middlemen in the UAE? Targeted. Obscure suppliers nobody had heard of? Gone. And then came the real hit: software. We're talking about the kind of software that runs modern industries such as engineering design tools, manufacturing systems, and advanced graphics and modeling. The kind of tools you need if you want to build anything complex: missiles, drones, aircraft, even basic industrial machinery. And suddenly, Russia couldn't legally access them anymore. Think about that for a second. You can have factories, you can have workers, you can even have raw materials, but if you don't have the software to design and produce modern systems, you're stuck. It's like trying to build an iPhone with a calculator. Now, you might think, okay, but Russia can just buy from China, right? That's what everyone assumed, and for a while, that is what happened. Russia rerouted imports, stockpiled chips, used civilian components for military gear. But then the US did something clever. It didn't just sanction Russia, it threatened everyone else. The message from Washington was along the lines of, if you help Russia, you're next. And they weren't joking. The US started targeting foreign companies using American technology to supply Russia, even those who did so indirectly, quietly, or through third parties, which meant that every company in the world had to make a choice. Do business with Russia or keep access to the global financial system? Spoiler, most chose the second, because losing access to US markets is economic suicide. So Russia wasn't only heavily sanctioned, but it was isolated from this. In June 2024, the US went after the core of Russia's financial system, the place where Russia trades currency, stocks, and pretty much everything: the Moscow Exchange. It got sanctioned, blocked, restricted, and almost overnight, dollar and euro trading on the exchange stopped. Imagine waking up and realizing your entire financial system just lost access to the world's main currencies. That's not like your card declining. That's destabilizing. Russia adapted, of course. They moved trading off exchange, started using alternative currencies like the Chinese yuan. But there's a catch. These workarounds are slower, often more expensive, and definitely less efficient. It's like switching from a highway to a dirt road. You still move, but not nearly as well. Now here's where things get serious. Because if Russia has one true lifeline, that would be its oil. Oil funds the budget, oil funds the military, oil keeps everything running. So obviously that's where the US focused next. In early 2025, Washington escalated dramatically. Not with a full ban, of course, because that would have shocked the global market. It did something more strategic instead. It targeted oil companies, tankers, insurers, brokers, and even ports. Basically, the entire ecosystem that moves Russian oil around the world. Russian oil could still be sold, yet only below a certain price. Otherwise, there would be sanctions. So Russia had two choices. It could sell cheap or not sell at all. And this is where it gets interesting. Russia didn't just sit back and accept it. It adapted. It built what's now known as a shadow fleet. Old tankers, complex ownership structures, and very creative routing. Honestly, it's kind of impressive. Like a geopolitical version of hiding money under the mattress. But even that started to crack. By late 2025, the US and its allies tightened the net. Hundreds of tankers were blacklisted. Major companies like Rosneft and Lukoil were targeted. Insurance got restricted, shipping routes were being monitored, and moving Russian oil became complicated again. It was risky, expensive, and even Russia's biggest customers started stepping back. China slowed purchases through state refiners. India reduced imports under pressure, not completely, but enough to matter. Because oil is all about volume, small changes in demand can bring big changes in revenue. Now let's talk numbers, because this is where the illusion breaks. On paper, Russia's economy didn't collapse, but if you take a closer look, growth dropped to around 1%. That's not growth. That signals survival. Corporate profits went own sharply, interest rates increases highly, and inflation is still a problem. The economy actually shrank at the start of 2026, not dramatically, but enough to raise alarms even inside Russia. The thing about sanctions is that they rarely work overnight, but over time, they reduce resources, options. Russia can still trade but with fewer partners, at worse prices, with higher risks. It can still produce but with lower quality components and slower processes. It can still fight but at a growing cost. And that may be the real strategy here. Not to stop Russia instantly, but to slowly exhaust it. Of course, the Kremlin isn't passive in all this. They've adapted in some creative ways. They started trading in non-dollar currencies, building closer ties with China, using barter deals, and expanding domestic production. And to be fair, some of this worked. Russia avoided total collapse, the system didn't break, but there's a difference between surviving and thriving, and right now, Russia is probably in survival mode. What we're seeing isn't just about Russia, but rather about how power works in today's world. The US didn't need to use missiles, tanks, or even troops for this battle. All it used was control. Control over financial systems, global trade, and technology networks. When you control those, you don't need to attack directly. You just restrict access and let the pressure build. So where does this go from here? There are really three possible paths, and none of them are simple. The first is slow economic erosion, just a steady decline, not collapse, not chaos. In this scenario, Russia continues operating, but with tighter margins, fewer resources, and growing inefficiencies. Growth stays stuck around 1% or lower, while the military production becomes more expensive and less advanced. Over time, this doesn't stop the war, but it makes sustaining it harder. It's like running a marathon with weights attached. You can keep going, just not forever. The second scenario is adaptation and stabilization. Russia doubles down on its pivot to Asia, especially China and India. Under these circumstances, current trade routes may become more permanent. New parallel financial systems may expand, while domestic industries improve enough to replace missing imports. In this version, sanctions don't break Russia. They reshape it into a more isolated, less efficient economy, but ensures its survival. The third, and most unpredictable, is strategic escalation or disruption. That could mean anything from more aggressive sanctions enforcement, Russia finding new loopholes or partners, or even geopolitical shifts that weaken the sanctions coalition. Keep in mind that sanctions only work as long as the system that is enforcing them holds itself together. If that cracks, even slightly, Russia gains breathing room. If enforcement tightens, then the pressure compounds, and this is where timing matters. Sanctions evolve, and each new package closes gaps. Each workaround gets harder. Like a chess game when it's close to the end, so the most likely outcome isn't a dramatic turning point. Many Western officials argue the strategy is working exactly as intended. Former US Treasury officials and analysts from organizations like the Atlantic Council emphasize that Russia hasn't collapsed, but that was never the goal. They claim the objective to be long-term degradation. In other words, to reduce Russia's ability to sustain a modern war economy. And right now, the data kind of backs that up. But not everyone is convinced. Some economists warn that sanctions have limits. They point out that Russia has proven more resilient than expected, partly due to high energy revenues and rapid adaptation. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund have noted that while sanctions hurt, they haven't triggered systemic collapse. And that matters because it suggests that Russia can still function, even under pressure. There's also growing debate about unintended consequences. Some scholars argue that sanctions may push countries like China to build alternative financial systems, encouraging non-Western alliances and slowly weakening the dominance of Western-controlled institutions. Said simpler, sanctions might be reshaping not just Russia but the global system itself. And then there's the more cautious view. Some analysts warn that sanctions fatigue could set in, that over time enforcement becomes harder, political priorities shift, and unity among allies weakens. Because ultimately, sanctions are political tools. In international relations, they are considered hard power instruments that require constant coordination, pressure, and commitment. So has the US destroyed Russia's lifelines? Not completely. Russia is still exporting oil, trading, functioning, but every one of those lifelines is weaker than it was 2 years ago. More fragile, more expensive, more limited, and most importantly, more replaceable by someone else. And that's the real problem for Putin. Sustaining this system is getting harder day by day. So the next time you hear someone say sanctions don't work, look a little closer. Because sometimes the most effective strategy isn't loud, it's quiet, slow, and almost invisible.